So what do you think, Mark? So
About aliens and flying
yeah,
saucers. I've actually had encounters, three encounters of
really?
significance.
Three
You know,
encounters.
two of them in the 1970s. One of them I've actually written an article about, which has very recently been published, where I saw a craft of some kind coming up the river valley when I was stood on a nearby hill, and it passed through the steam on a power station. So it was obviously not a helicopter or anything like that. And
Oh,
I saw this thing come up the river, and then it kind of it had lights like you see in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's got kind of that kind of thing going on,
wow.
and it came all the way up the river as far as the town where I live, and then it just shot off. Everything switched off and it vanished. You just saw this little black streak disappear into the sky. At the same time as that, what I didn't realize is there were witnesses to that on the other side of the power station, and then there were witnesses even further away on another part of the local area called the Wirral. So this thing that I'd seen had obviously travelled a distance of about 40 or 50 miles, and one of the witnesses over on the Wirral was actually an aircraft pilot, was almost hit by this thing. So over the years, this account has grown. So I'm a very firm believer in what they're known as UAPs now. But yeah, a very firm believer in those. Also, I saw another one when I was out camping one night. I saw this star going at tremendous speed across the star field, and then it sort of got to the center of the sky, and then it just kind of went ping, 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 back and two across about 4 or 5 times, and then
I've
again
seen one of
vanished.
those once. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, they just take off at 90-degree angles at
Yeah.
enormous speed. And then the third encounter, which you're going to find most fascinating, I think, is I was brought in as an archaeologist in the hope that we were going to dig up a UFO crash in Wales, because it's known as the Aberystwyth Roswell, or Europe's Roswell, if you get the DVD, which we produced. This thing came down, crashed in fields in a village called Llanillar. The guy I was working with, a guy called Gary Rowe, he has a briefcase full of fragments, one of which is sat in my storeroom. Yeah, I've had a lot of encounters with these actual flying, lit up, physical. I absolutely, utterly, totally know they're out there.
Well, see, but see, don't you think I think it's important because you're a geologist, you're an archaeologist,
Yeah.
so you're a scientist, and I think it's good that people know right away. Are you talking from experience? When you're talking about ancient aliens and technology, or are you talking just in kind of things to entertain people?
Yeah. Is it in theory or is it in practice?
Yes.
In essence, no.
Right.
It's very much in practice.
Yeah, that's
My dad before me was a book collector, so he had Flying Saucers Have Landed by George Adamski. He had Chariots of the Gods by Derek Von Daniken. He had all of those books around as I was growing up as a child. So I just became fascinated by them. And I've got an enormous interest in the paranormal and the supernatural, aside from what I've actually trained as a career.
Well, I've got a question, though. I want to interrupt you.
No, by all means.
Did you have a reaction when you saw the one UFO coming down the river and you knew this was absolutely an alien craft? Did you kind of well up tears? Because I remember doing that once where I was watching UFO over a lake, and I was watching other craft come out of it. And I was using a 400 millimeter lens with a camera on a tripod. Yeah. So I'm not getting this shaky footage. I'm looking through the viewfinder, and it was at a home that Alex and I lived at back in the 90s on Forest Lake.
Forest Lake. Yep.
And I remember when I saw this other flying saucer come out of this mothership that had 8 lights on it, I remember getting welled up with tears.
Well, the key seems to be the lights, because the first thing I saw coming through the steam off these cooling towers were lights. And it struck me immediately that, yes, there was a couple of white lights, but there was also a blue light and a red light. And I'm thinking, and they're scanning, like you see in the movies. And I'm thinking, that's definitely not a helicopter and it's not a plane because the configuration's wrong. And all of these beams were going back to a single point, a single source. So the distance involved, you couldn't actually really see the ship. It was just a black dot with all these lights coming out of it. So that got my attention to begin with. So that was just disturbing. I wouldn't say, it was like, oh, what's that kind of thing, And then as it moved up the valley, and it was scanning sort of on the north bank of the River Mersey, which is where I live here. As it's coming up the river, you're thinking, hang on a minute, that's a bit strange. So that's when it started to become a bit creepy. I suppose for me, the wow moment is, I was absolutely focused on this thing, whatever it was. And the wow moment is when all the lights went off and it just shot off vertically so fast that it kind of left an after image in your eyes, you know what I mean? And that's the point where you're left stood there breathless, absolutely speechless, thinking, what the hell was that?
I mean, did you get emotional almost?
I'm not the sort of person that gets emotional when I encounter anything that's supernatural, because that's something that's been happening to me my entire life. So, I mean, I'm sat here now doing an interview from a haunted house. This house is it's a paranormal gateway. It's built on a Celtic Roman cemetery. So I'm sat here now. I mean, I live it every day. So I don't get that emotional in that sense. Also, as an archaeologist, I was going to say, as an archaeologist, when you're digging up dead people and things like that,
So did you intentionally choose to move into this place for that?
No, my dad actually.
I know it after the fact.
My dad was the second owner. He bought the house about 66 years ago. And he bought it off the original owner who built it. And it was built in 1925. And it was known to be a Roman area, but the whole digging up the excavation of the cemetery thing, actually, that was still only happening in the 1990s and the 2000s, immediately opposite the house, because they were developing the school area. We have a school in front of us, and it was just bringing up all these burials and, urns and structures and monuments and all sorts. So it's 110% positive that's what this is sat on. But I've lived here since I was 8 years old. So the stuff that was going on here, objects moving, apparitions, witnesses, you name it. Most recently, we've just done the house up, so we had builders in, and for 2 years, these guys have been bombarded with stuff happening. They've had tools vanish in front of their eyes. They've had things move across rooms. They've had lights. They've seen figures on the second floor. One guy thought my dad was waving at him, but my dad was, my dad's 80 odd and he's in the back kitchen. He's nowhere near the bedroom window. This sort of thing just tumbles on, so you kind of get used to it.
So is your father? Is he still alive, or is he passed?
No, right. He passed away in August.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
In fact, he passed away in the other room there, because he stayed here right to the very end. He lived at home. He was 89 and he was going a bit. He had Alzheimer's and dementia, so I think he bowed out the best way possible. He had a heart attack in the middle of the night, so he's here 1 minute, gone the next, and probably went in his sleep. That's what the coroner said. So, that's the best way to go, really.
Yeah.
But he just lived with it. He was a bit.
I was just wondering whether he's joined. Has he joined in the hauntings?
Well, I've got to tell you this, because a friend of mine was walking past the front of the house, and he looked in through the window and he saw my dad sat at my office chair, which is just on the other side of the room. I was reading a book. My dad sat there minding his own business. And then my friend came to the house and he said, "Oh, how's your dad?" And I went, "He died 2 weeks ago." So it's like, so yeah, he's still knocking around somewhere. I'm convinced of it.
That's crazy.
But like I say, you just get used to it.
Nice. Okay.
This is not where I thought we were going to go, by the way. But
No,
I'm quite happy to go in this direction.
I like to get into who is my damn guest, right away. Like, who are you? Before we get into this other stuff.
But you seem so comfortable with the paranormal.
I am extremely comfortable with it. The first time I ever saw anything in this house, I think we just moved in, so I'd be about 7.5 years old. A full colour, full like floating Victorian guy in full gear, but you could see straight through him. So that got me started at the age of like 7, my 7th year. So I'm 59, I think I am at the moment. I'll be 60, I think, the end of this year. So, it's been a long life in the supernatural, and as an archaeologist, when you're on dig sites and you're out about, I mean, I could do, there's like 25 years of stories there of, people running in off dig sites going, "Oh, I'm sure I just saw this, or that moved, or this happened," or, so, you just kind of get used to it. I guess I'm more open about it. Like I say, I'm very, very comfortable with it.
Well,
did your dad see stuff? when
Yeah, my dad did. Yeah, my mum did as well when she was alive. Both of them saw things here. Lots of my schoolmates, when I was a teenager, because the local school's not far away, they'd come back, you know, and they'd say, "Oh, you've left the television on in your bedroom," and it'd be like, "I haven't got a TV in my bedroom." "Oh, well, what's the light in your room?" You know, and things like that.
Oh no.
You know, one friend came back and switched the light on, and something came whizzing across the room. So they went and put it back and turned the light off and went, you know, this is nonsense. I don't believe it. Switched the light on again, and the same object got thrown at them again. And I was behind them, so I saw that happen twice. So, you know, people totally independent of me, you know, who, you know, have witnessed things here, you know, are still alive today. So yeah.
So did you see the Arthur C. Clarke show on the crystal skulls when you were young too?
I'm going to say I must have done. I mean, as I say, I've got the book obviously, and it's got the Mitchell Hedges skull on the cover. So I've got that. So I remember the series, but mainly through the book. I think it was the 1980s. So you're going back away there when he did the series, or when it was broadcast in this country.
Yeah.
So yeah, I saw it back then. But again, the interest I had as an archaeologist in things like crystal skulls wasn't as strong then, so I didn't pay attention in the way I wish I had.
Well, is there new information that's come to light on the crystal skulls since Arthur C. Clarke covered that story?
Yeah, bucket loads.
Okay.
The biggest piece of information really to happen post that program was that Anna agreed to have the Mitchell Hedges skull electron go under electron microscopy. I nearly said that. Under an electron microscope.
Scanning
anyway, that's the one. She had it looked at basically for tool marks, because if you can find tool marks on something, you can date it, you can age it, etc., etc. But the biggest shock was that the microscope found absolutely nothing. Even in the crevices, the cracks, you know, the lines in the teeth and the eye sockets and that, no evidence at all of how that thing was made. So I put that in the category of, I'm pretty sure it's a real one. You know, there are tens of thousands of fakes now knocking around. They bang them out every year by the thousand. But if you go back in time, that number decreases. There are less and less and less of them until you get back to, I think Mitchell Hedges was found in the 1930s, and Anna to a dying day never changed her story. So there's things like that that make you think, yeah, that's real. You know, that comes from an altar at Lebanton in Belize. You know, that's where that comes from. That's where she found it. But there are others. I mean, I've got one. I actually own one that has an interesting story. And then there are a couple of others that exist. One in a ballpark in Coba, still in the jungle, and it's set in the floor, so it's never moved. So that's a real one. That's in Milky White quartz. And then fairly recently, outside Mexico City, when they were excavating an Aztec village there, they came up with one which is sort of chunky. It sits in your hand. It's not quite life size. It's smaller. And the one I've got's a little bit smaller. And that's got into the archaeological record with a find site. The only thing is they won't tell you where, because they don't want the find site to be ransacked. You know, they're very protective of these things.
Okay, well, let's back up the truck here. So you say you have a crystal skull, and you have something that's not a replica?
Yeah, I've got one which is it conforms to it being a real one. Briefly, because I know we're live, the story is there was a chap out there, probably between the First and Second World War, out on the Yucatan Peninsula, and he was gifted this skull by Mayan villagers for whatever it was he did out there, you know, during the war. He was given it because it wasn't Mayan, it's actually Aztec. So to the Mayans, it was like, there you go, nice shiny piece of crystal, you can take that with you. He was getting older and older and older. Obviously, people don't live forever. So as the custodian of the skull, he was in Freemasonry, and he passed it on to his lodge master, because his lodge master is a responsible, you know, person who can remember the story and would look after it. Subsequent to that, the lodge master now is getting old, and he contacted me and he said, "Oh, I believe you're interested in crystal skulls." And I'm, yeah, you know, an archaeologist. He said, "Well, you'll appreciate this," and produce this crystal skull. And it conforms to the rules of a real one. To be a real one, it's got to be handmade and hand polished, with most of the tool marks, you know, shone off it if possible. If it's machine made, forget it, it's nonsense. It won't be more than a couple hundred years old. It's in a style you would expect for Aztec, because I know that as an archaeologist. There's dirt and stuff stuck in the cracks, and it is quite transparently old. And whoever made it has made it paying attention to the crystal. So it's kind of clear at the back, sort of misty in the middle, and then a bit milky at the front. So the way they've done it, they've obviously spent a huge amount of time doing it. I would say it's maybe, I don't know, pre-Columbian, maybe maybe a little bit later, possibly Cortez. So you took an end of the 1400s, beginning of the 1500s. I think that's the kind of period you're looking at. With
Well, how many years would it take to polish out by hand? To carve
Well,
it and then polish it?
to carve it, it's going to take a long time. And if you make a mistake, you've had it. You know, if one of these things splits down a fault line, you've had it. You just end up with 2 pieces of quartz. Mine's got fault lines in it, so they obviously were very careful in the way they did it. It's very solid. It probably would have taken, I don't know, 10 years maybe to produce a decent looking one. But then the polishing part of it, this is the Mitchell Hedges again. The argument is that it's been handled. They didn't deliberately sit there for 100 years, you know, scrubbing it with a Brillo pad, trying to get all the marks off. What's happened is people have picked it up, handled it, and the dust and dirt on the hands has shone out a lot of the marks on it. Wow. It's very tactile. You know, you put your thumbs in the eye sockets and you rub the teeth and all this. Mm-hmm. In the case of Mitchell Hedges, I mean, that's hundreds of years, takes hundreds of years to shine one up like that. The one I've got's, you know, probably a good few hundred years old.
Because well, how come you don't have it? How come you don't have it and show the audience this?
Because it's in storage. I didn't realize tonight was going to be visual. It's in the book. I mean, it's a really good chance to plug the book. You get Crystal Skulls and Human Heads.
Yes.
There's a full page photograph of it in there. And over here, I'm doing a conference in June at Blackpool, the Awakening Conference, Awakening Expo 2022. So I'm doing that in Blackpool, and it'll be there. It'll be on display.
Okay.
Coincidentally with Eric von Daniken, who I'm dying to meet. I'm really dying to meet.
Oh, cool! You get to hang out with Eric, huh?
I get to hang out with Eric.
So why don't you take this moment and tell us, you know, as brief as you can, but who you are, and your credentials and about your book.
Okay, as briefly as I can. Two-part answer there. One's me, the other's the book. Me, I got into my first archaeology because my dad was a volunteer digger. So he was digging over here for archaeology groups and societies during the 50s and 60s. He dumped me into a Roman dig site in the 1970s when I was 8 years old, and I just got hooked, absolutely hooked at that point. But at the same time, going through education, I ended up going off to art college, doing my stint at art college. Across the road here in Warrington is the museum. So simultaneous with doing that, I was also studying archaeology under Liverpool University. So I did that for quite a long time. Back in those days, you did it as extension studies, and you could do it for years. I mean, I did it for 5-6 years, something like that. That's where the qualification side of that comes from. I then got a record deal, went off into the music business, spent 21 years hitting the drums for loads and loads of people because I did sessions and all kinds of things. And then eventually I retired. I retired because me back collapsed, basically, which is the best of the options, because for a drummer, it's like piles, incontinence, or a bad back. And I was lucky because I got the bad back. So fortunately. So I retired in the 1990s and came back to writing and back to history and back to archaeology. Did a few local history books, got picked up by the local TV station, which turns out was ITV1 Granada. They made a series called Lost Treasures, which I literally produced, wrote, presented, you know, everything, music, locations, the lot. That went on for 4 years, I think, in total. We did 2005, 7 and 8. 22 episodes, which is knockout for a non-mainstream channel. It got sold on to Sky. So Sky History was still broadcasting episodes up to about 2011. So I've broken away and done a couple of productions of my own, and now I'm heading in the direction of Zohar Entertainment, who are online, and I'm going to be doing some programs for them. I think they've got 2 series in mind. One's at least 10 part, and I think the other one's about 12. So you'll see me popping up on there. So that's a bit about me. Musician, artist, archaeologist.
And the name of your band?
Copperworm. It's the
can we
spiral
see? Okay, once people get to know you and love you after this, can they go to a music video, or do you have any?
Well, yeah. At the moment, what you do is you pick any format. You can pick, Twitter, Facebook, Bandcamp, whatever you want to go for. Type in Copperworm on, and then whatever you want to find us on, and chances are we'll come up. But the proviso is that the material that's on there was mostly done under lockdown, so it's under the last 3 years. The live lineup that we've got now is really literally starting now. So you'll get a feel for the music, you'll get a feel for where the band's coming from, or just come and find me on Facebook, because there's loads of stuff coming up on my Facebook.
Right.
Type my name in and boom, they are.
And the copper worm is the thing on a still, right? That you told
Yeah,
me.
it's that copper spiral.
Yeah.
You know, you start
Yeah.
off with rubbish at one end and you end up with alcohol at the other. So
Oh,
we're kind
there you go.
of we're distilling our influences to produce, you know, something hopefully intoxicating at the end.
Yeah. And I went out, was it Friday night? Yeah. Thursday night and Friday. And I hadn't had a drink in forever just because of the COVID, and we, you know,
Yeah.
everybody's been so antisocial. So I haven't had any cocktails because I haven't gotten together with anybody. So we all got together, a whole bunch of us guys got together, and I sat and drank tequila and had some beers, and it was so amazing to
I've
get
got to
that
say,
little buzz again.
yeah, you've got better tequila than we have, I can promise you.
Oh, Patron Silver. It was amazing.
UK, we just get like no name. You know, tequila and vodka are really disappointing in this country compared to the countries of origin. But
Yeah.
there you go.
So, anyhow, enough of that. But okay.
All right.
Well, all right. So, when they made these crystal skulls? One, I want to know what purpose did they make them for? But how did they actually make them? Were they done with chisels and a hammer, or was it some other kind of tool? How did they do it?
Well, there's three processes really. Nowadays, you know, they turn on the electric drill and, you know, off they go, and there you have a skull in next to no time, because they've got all these mechanized tools, which it's dead easy to see. I mean, if you closely examine these skulls, you'll see all the, you know, the wear and tear on them. It's easy. Then if you go back about 100 years, maybe 150 years, you've got a ruck of skulls, most of them in museums. So things like the one in the British Museum, the one in Paris, ones in Paris, things like that. They've got wheel marks on them. So they've been ground down. So it's probably a bit like the old-fashioned sewing machine, some guy with a pedal and a disc spinning, and he's working it, you know, old school by hand.
But let's back up here. What if they had that technology back 400 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago?
You're into the third category now, because the third category, it's not so much to do with the technology, it's to do with what these things are and what they represent.
Right.
They take the trouble to do a proper job. So you end up with these skulls where it's nigh on impossible to find any tool marks on them at all, because they've obviously done something to make them. So as you say, they could have been filed, ground, chiseled. You know, personally, I think they use some kind of an abrasive, you know, even if it's just rubbing an abrasive stone onto the crystal. But then it's the amount of trouble they take afterwards. It's kind of, you know, post-production, if you like.
Right.
It's when you get them to this point where they're so shiny and smooth and they're mirror-like, but you can still see they're handmade because they're not absolutely machine perfect, you know. So you've got those three stages basically. You've got modern, which is easy to spot. You've got the middle period, which a lot of people think they're genuine because they kind of look it, till you have a closer examination, you realize a couple hundred years max. And then you've got the third category, which is the one you were just referring to, where the workmanship is just stunning. You know, they started with an enormous block of crystal and they've just gone at it, and ta-da, there you have it. You know, second answer, really, significance to these things. They have qualities. They are electrical, you know, they are magnetic, they diffract light. There's a possibility that somewhere in there there's data stored, because they've recently learned how to read glass over here. They're using glass now as a data storage, and that's silicon, and that's what quartz is. Quartz is silicon. So there's a possibility there's something hiding in there.
Well, I want to interrupt you. This is really interesting where this is going, but for everybody needs to know that when you go out to light your gas grill and you flick that knob, it's quartz crystal being vibrated, and it makes a spark.
Yeah,
it is voltage too.
Yeah, if you squash them, they produce the batteries for wristwatches. They're in the silicon chips in this machine. Yeah. If you wear glasses, you're actually staring out through silicon. It's basically, it's everywhere. We are carbon life forms living in what is essentially a silicon world. You know, there's so many varieties of silica as well. Everything from bath sealant to flint. You know,
right? But you were alluding to the fact that these things may have data stored in them.
That goes back to the 1970s. Yeah, there's this legend grew in the 70s that if you got all the crystal skulls together, magical number 12 or 13 or whatever, they somehow would sort of light up and start to exchange information, and it was going to bring enlightenment to the world and all sorts of things. This real legend grew up around them, which at that point I was thinking, this has got to be nonsense. There can't be anything in this. And then I hit an article in Nature magazine where it's saying that they've now produced this glass CD. I think it's Southampton University that's done it. They can write data with a laser into this glass CD in 5D. It's 5-dimensional writing. It uses a colossal amount of laser power to get in there and get out again.
I've read that they can store the entire world's history, every written book, just everything that's ever been produced, every piece of music, every video, blah, 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 on one disc.
One disc. So the next step there, the logical step is, if we could read a quartz crystal, if we knew how to read that, what would we discover? That's the question. So all these people that were poo-pooing the New Ages by saying, it's a load of nonsense, this, how can you get data in a crystal skull? And now we know how we can get data in a crystal skull. The problem is we don't know how to get it back out again. But no doubt, that will come.
So what experiments have been done? And one thing I do want to talk to you, Mark, in private probably, about things that you could try with your crystal skull. I guarantee have never been tried. That would not hurt it.
The most amazing experiment, actually, I'm just going to jump sideways slightly. Yeah. It's still using crystal. If you're on a beach somewhere, quartz is all over the world. What you find are these white pebbles. You get white quartz pebbles. They turn up all over the place.
Right.
And anybody can do this. They've been doing it for thousands of years. You get two of these white pebbles about the same size, bring them home with you, turn all the lights off so you're in complete darkness, and bang them together like that. And what happens is you get gold and silver flashes that's coming off them. Now, they're not sparks. You can't light a fire with this. It's piezoelectric discharge.
Oh, okay.
So what's happening is these stones are giving out electrons and they're producing flashes. Now, it's incredible, but it's a property, that is a quality, piezoelectricity of the skulls, of planet Earth and of us.
I want to back up again, because now you mentioned something else, because I'll do underwater recording and I'll use piezo crystals to record sound underwater. Crystals are, people always think, well, they're great to wear on your, wrist or a bracelet or whatever. But no, they have magical properties that we know how to use. We don't even know really how they work. But let's talk about the sound. We talked about the electricity. What about the sound?
Well, it's super technology. I've just got so many thoughts running through my head at the moment, because in prehistory, these white quartz stones, pebbles, they used to collect them together and they used to cover burial mounds with them and line the surface of stone circles with them. And the banks around these circles, they used to put them on there as well. It was said that they reflect moonlight, and they kind of light up and they have this quality. But now you start talking about, you're into Paul Devereaux's territory here with archaeoacoustics. If you cover something with enough of this, what effect does that start to have?
Right.
We're at the stage where somebody somewhere needs to build a complete functioning stone circle, but with all the add-ons, with the water in the ditch that reflects the bank, getting all the lighting correct and then getting the acoustics correct. And I suppose you could do it on computer, you could mock it up, but somebody needs to build it. Absolutely, simulation. There's a lot more going on than has previously been thought. There's archaeo-experimentation to be done there to find out, the meanings of that. And I don't think anybody's been fully informed enough to do that correctly.
Well, just to mention one more thing, a piezo microphone can also be used and reversed as a speaker.
Yes, it can.
Yeah. Great speakers too, underwater speakers. We were doing fish intelligence experiments, and we were broadcasting certain sounds, and then we would shoot food out a tube a mile out into the water.
Wow.
This underwater camera system I built. And then we would we would play different music and see, to basically train the fish to say, oh, this is the dinner bell.
Do you know, I'm sorry, my sense of humor is terrible. I just had visions of these dolphins all standing around there trying to talk back to you, giving you a message saying, look, we dig the music. We think the music's fantastic. Stop throwing our food out there. That's miles away. Can you not throw it a bit closer?
It was so interesting, though, to think that we were using crystal technology to talk to fish.
Oh, I've just spotted, actually, a message has come up on here about quartz being responsible for recorded information in hauntings. Yeah. Absolutely. That has got to be it. There's quartz in every building, and we've had a lot of paranormal investigators over here that have said exactly that, just that. Maybe it's nature's hologram. You get the correct kind of circumstances, out comes the data. There you have it. I'm a firm believer quartz is the key to that. So anyway, sorry about that.
It's basically a primitive but advanced tape recorder, every piece of crystal.
Yes. Well, it's more advanced than we know how to deal with at the moment. Right. We've got some of the properties. You can get the electrical side of it on Curlian photography. You can get the pressure coming back to power watches, etc. You can do all sorts of tricks with it, but I don't think we're looking at the data side of it.
Well, it keeps time
quite the right way.
Right, the quartz keeps absolutely time.
The most perfect spheres on planet Earth, which NASA actually use them to test for drag in time and space. They put a satellite up with a couple of these perfect spheres in. They're made of quartz, the quartz silica, these perfect spheres. So they've been used in some absolutely incredible ways. Fantastic science experiments.
Now, Mark, does your work, does that tie into the ancient aliens theory at all, or am I completely off track there?
I think we're going to go there.
I was going to say, why not? We'll jump in. Actually, I do deal with that. It's in the book. I've got a slightly different take on it because a lot of people are looking for evidence to fit ancient aliens, and what they tend to do is they look at these enormous stretched heads, they look at genetics, they look at the DNA, they look at monuments and buildings and all kinds of things that it appears that we are incapable of building. So they're trying to get all this evidence together and go, I tell you what, it's aliens. Well, if you actually buy the book and look at the book, what the book is saying is it's not aliens, it's us. We are, in fact, alien in the sense that the species of mankind that did all of that, that had these enormous heads genetically, we've lost them. They're extinct. They're gone. So all their achievements we're now attributing to off-world creatures. And again, in the conclusion to the book, I'm not even sure, I don't go down the off-world route because I'm not a huge fan of things whizzing in and out of the Van Allen belts. I'm not sure that's possible. However, if these guys had super technology and they managed to crack the problem of time and space, that's a different matter altogether, because they may still come from planet Earth. They may still be here, and they might just be bobbing in and out now.
From a different timeline.
Now is a significant time for us. Certainly, it's a significant time. Also, if you're coming from the past, if you're sort of coming forward in your own time, you don't get this paradox where you screw up your own timeline, because they're actually coming forward. It doesn't matter what they do when they get here, because they're only changing from here onwards, if you see what I mean. So
that was confusing, Mark.
No, honestly, he gets it. Alex gets it.
I don't.
Mark,
my head explodes when we deal with time travel.
Does your book cover this? Do you feel like we went through a de-evolution, so that in the past we were? So it sounds like you're saying we were more advanced as a civilization, perhaps at some point.
If you're honest as an archaeologist, if you're totally brutally honest, the past, they were doing things better, bigger, and in amazing ways, doing things back then that we've sort of rediscovered, if you like, or not discovered yet. So it seems evident that what was going on back there was superior in many ways to what's going on here. By superior, though, I don't mean microchips and nuclear reactors, and I don't mean like that. I think they made fundamentally different choices. They were superior because they actually functioned and fitted in to the world around them because of their understanding of the planet. So that's, if you like, going down the green route. That's going down the ecology side of it, where you're saying, okay, they were better than us because they knew how to live here better than us. And then they
The
didn't make
technology was adapted better to the environment.
absolutely. They didn't make the mistakes we made. I mean, I was joking with somebody the other day. I was saying, they invent an aeroplane, so they throw an aeroplane up. This aeroplane's going, all of a sudden they get 12 of these going. One of them crashes, bang, the whole of the passengers are killed. And they go, right, that's it. We're not going to build anymore. So they just stop. So there's no more airplanes in the archaeological record. The Egyptians might have done that. They might have just reached a different decision. They might have just gone, it's too dangerous. Don't want to do that. And then you've got these things in India where you've got like nuclear blast sites, some guys tinkering away with nuclear power. All of a sudden, boom, the whole village goes up, everyone's fried, and everyone just goes, right, that's it. This is too dangerous. We're just not going to do it. Whereas us, we're into everything. We're just complete crazy.
I mean, there is evidence here, isn't there, of nuclear explosions?
Yeah. There's a couple of villages in India where it looks like there was an aerial blast of some kind, and literally the bodies are like this, in all kinds of positions, and they're fried onto the ground,
and
the ground is turned to glass.
Yeah,
and it's got high radiation readings on Geiger counters. So
it's just insane.
So they have had everything that we've got. They just chose to do it differently. It's like the Baghdad battery, these little batteries that generate 3.5 volts. They're like clay jars, Yep. Well, what they don't tell you is that out on the archaeological site where these are found, they're wired in parallel, and you get like 500 of these in a block.
Right.
So you can imagine some guy, turning up to electroplate his statue, and he gets hold of the wires. And it's like he's gone, fried. And at some point they've thought, no, we're not mucking about with this.
I mean, there is so much evidence that they were doing electroplating.
Well, that's what they think these things were for, but nobody actually knows. But basically, it was a power station powered by white wine.
Yeah, these are batteries anybody can make with a potato. I mean, it's just a simple concept. You have two different kinds of plates, like a copper plate and an iron plate.
Yeah. One of those batteries in a clay pot is the same as a Duracell AA, 3.5 volt. But you stick them in parallel,
right?
And the voltage, and I'm not great on electric, but anyway, it adds up. So you finish up with quite a wallop at the end of it, So they were mucking about with some fairly dangerous things in the past, Yeah.
It's just, it's absolutely amazing. God, it would be just so cool to know exactly all of the technologies that even they had that we've lost, that we just don't have anymore.
Well, there's so many examples of it, like Baalbek, where they've got these, 300-ton blocks. And not only can we not move them now, but these guys in the past have stuck them halfway up a wall. So we're looking at these going, how in tarnation did they get that thing up there? But then if you go back to, your biblical times where you got giants wandering around who are 35 foot tall and, built like a brick outhouse, then at the end of the day, you get like 20 of them. And it's just, right, lads, up goes the block. The bit we're missing is that race of humans has been extinct for a couple of thousand years. So we're looking at the block, but we're missing the rest of the information. We're not joining the dots.
Are you talking about multiple subspecies of human?
Not just me. If you have a look at the book, there's DNA now, not just for Neanderthals and Homo sapiens sapien, which is what we are. They've now got Denisovans, which is another race that have gone extinct. I think they've got Eurasia 1 and Eurasia 2, which are another 2 extinct species. They've now got Homo floresiensis, which are these little 3'6" hobbit people, which you'll be aware of. They've got all these elongated skulls, the Paracas skulls from South America. They are genetically not the same as us. They've started analysing remains from Native Americans out in the United States. There's probably another 2 or 3 different species there that are coming out. The same is true of Russia. The same is true of some of the living races of Africa and Australia. They've just recently completed mapping the whole human genome. It's only happened in the last year or so. So now they can actually see which bits of that genome come from somewhere else. The best quote I've seen was in Nature magazine, and it was some guy saying that it's beginning to look like the past was a Lord of the Rings type world. So you literally have from tiny little people right the way through to enormous people. But I always give the same example. Nowadays, you can have a cat, a jungle cat that will sit in the palm of your hand, or you can cross a lion and tiger and get this thing called a liger, which is the size of a horse. So in nature, you get the full range of sizes, you get the full spectrum. Exactly what you would expect to see in human beings. But at this point in time, you don't, because most of the rest of them are gone. They're fossil species.
Do you think that all of these different races of humans killed each other? Because obviously there's been so many. We have less species now. Don't you agree that we probably had 400,000?
Yeah. I think Alex said he used the word devolving, devolution. It's not evolution. We're not like rising to some higher thing. That's just, some kind of happy, joy kind of story. That's not happening. It's not what the evidence supports. The evidence supports everything going downhill. It starts off as perfection and it finishes up as a mess. And you lose a lot of things along the way. There's 18,500 species alive today. There's at least 36,500 species in the fossil record, and that's going up by a couple of species every week. So obviously the Earth was vastly more diverse in the past. Yes, it's basically, that's what's happening. We've got this thing going on. So we've ended up now far less as a species. There's far less of us around. And the more that we've looked at fossil records, especially the Neanderthals, wherever Homo sapiens sapien moves in to the fossil record, the other species die out or move out. So it does look like we're the aggressor. Right. Also with the Paracas as well, South America, they were fine. They were still around up to like 500 or 600 years ago. These guys with enormous 3 times capacity skulls, the giant cone heads, they were walking around. They were alive.
So you're saying they weren't cradle-boarded people. These were naturally big-headed.
Both. There's both. There's actually both.
Right.
But a lot of them died as a result of the diseases that the Spanish took over. Smallpox, flu, things they weren't resistant
to. Wiped them out.
They just became extinct. So yes, we are directly or indirectly responsible for upsetting an awful lot of the ecological balance out there.
So Mark, would you say then that's kind of the basis for a lot of these myths? You talked about like giants and these, halflings and goblins, and some of this stuff might have some basis and actual.
It's kind of a balancing act. I think, yes, a lot of it's got a basis in fact. Are dinosaurs dragons? Well, the answer is yes, of course. Is the thunderbird a pterodactyl? Yeah, of course it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's things like that. Giants, yes, no problem with that whatsoever. But there are still legends. These things do still get exaggerated and
absolutely
broiled and what have you. But yes, I am saying basically there is a huge amount of support within discoveries. If people are broad enough to accept what's out there, there's enough evidence to say yes, the diversity in the past is decreasing, but has a foundation in the myths that we're finding now in what people are saying.
What do you think Darwin meant when he said that a lot of his theories would be proven wrong? What do you think? What was in that hidden message there?
Yeah, I think he did Origin of Species, and to be honest, as far as it goes, there's a lot of stuff in there that he was bang on. Yes, things adapt to suit their environment. If the environment changes, of course they do. You're not going to be the same after an asteroid impact or a comet strike or a tidal wave or whatever volcanic eruption. Of course, things are going to adapt in order to survive. But he actually said that he never witnessed one thing turning into another. He never saw a monkey turn into a man or anything like that. I mean, we're only one chromosome away from a pig anyway, so we've got nothing to do with monkeys. So he knew there was something not quite right, but he couldn't put his finger on it. The whole evolution thing came after him. A lot of people got hold of it then and started to use his material in ways that he wasn't happy with. So before he died, I think it's apocryphal, but I'm pretty sure he said, I wish, I deeply regret writing that damn book. I wish I'd never written that damn book, because people just took hold of it and ran with it and just did things with it that he never intended. He was looking at living species. He was looking at the planet, very much in a sort of David Attenborough way, where he's saying, okay, what have we got? What's here now? How did these things get here and how are these things behaving? And then somebody, some bright spark came up with this idea that something changes into something else. You've seen the T-shirt, with slime growing into a lizard that grows into a, something that has arms and legs that becomes a monkey that grows into a man and, eventually becomes Arnold Schwarzenegger at the end. It's kind of, that's, you've got the T-shirt with it on.
The epitome.
That is, well, that's genetically impossible. We know that can't be done now, even when they mutate and, they change.
So that's what people get wrong.
Yeah, it's just wrong. It just can't be done. It's impossible. We can make DNA change and we can mix and match DNA. So you get a mouse with an ear on the back of it or whatever. You can do all this kind of thing, but you're still only working with the existing building blocks. Nobody has actually seen anything turn into anything else in nature. It's just never been witnessed. It doesn't happen.
Do you think we'll ever come to a point where we can actually just create DNA from scratch? Totally from scratch.
There's going to be some guy out there now who's been involved in working out what the genome is, and he's going to be dreading somebody saying that, because he's probably looking at the genome thinking, you know, I've got no idea what I'm looking at, because it's huge. It's absolutely enormous. You know, it's mathematically incomprehensible. So I think we'll get to the stage where we can tinker with it. You know, we can muck about with it and see what happens. Yeah, you know, but I mean, on a bigger scale than we're doing now. I'm sure they'll tinker with it, but I don't think anything good's going to come of it. I think there's safety mechanisms built into the planet that prevent you from going beyond a certain point.
Do you fathom the idea that somebody in the universe actually created the DNA? That somebody said, "Ooh, look at this cool thing! I'm just going to type out here."
That's kind of that knife cuts both ways, so to speak. Because I mean, if it cuts one way, you can't say you can't go down with something out of nothing. You know, in the beginning there was nothing and then it exploded. You can't do that. Even Stephen Hawking had struggled with that one. You've got to have something at the beginning. So in a sense, the knife going that way rules out this idea of it not being creative, not being a creation thing. But then it swings the other way and it goes, right, okay, structure, order, etc., doesn't automatically appear out of chaos. You're into chaos formula there. You can't make something, force something into order without something externally doing that. So that's the other side of it. And the answer for that then would be yes, something somewhere at some point did something to make that order come into being. Now, that's the point where everybody, who doesn't matter what religion they're in, will all jump on it, either for it or against it. Or, oh, he's a creationist, you know, that nonsense rubbish. Right. At the end of the day, if it's a duck and it quacks like a duck, then shoot, it's a duck, you know.
Well, I just wonder if we'll ever get to a point, you know, humankind, where we get to a point where we go, oh, we can actually make these little packets of DNA from scratch.
Well, nobody ever does.
Build them out of carbon.
I mean, we've got this. We've got this thing where we're like, oh, you know, yes, we can make a baby in an artificial womb, and you know, we can, you know, decide whether it's got blue eyes or brown eyes or blonde hair or whatever else, and blah blah blah. The end of the day, what they're doing there is building a house out of bricks that already exist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm yet to meet anybody that can quite literally make something that is completely original, that's never been seen before, out of nothing. None of us as human beings are ever, I don't think, going to ever be able to do that.
I just always wonder, though, Mark, is there somebody in the universe that can?
I'm personally believe that there is definitely something. I wouldn't say a somebody.
Well,
it's like, let's go down the Judaic-Christian view and say, you know, don't make any false images of God. I think it's the first commandment. That's wisdom. That's very wise in a practical sense. For us as human beings, I don't think we can ever create anything that comes even close to whatever it was that, you know, got this whole thing together and got us running the way that we're running now. Whatever did this is a, you know, hyper intelligent super being that's way off the Richter scale. I could give you so many examples of how there are things here that are just not human. You know, we cannot do certain things. You know, we could use existing materials. We could use what we've got to achieve things. I mean, even I think they've photographed now a sperm going into an egg. And when it gets in the egg goes boom, and it explodes into a shower of zinc sparks. It lights up with light. Well, okay. Even that, you know, it's artificial insemination or whatever the hell you want to call it. You know, at the end of the day, you start with the sperm, you start with the egg. You don't make them appear out of nowhere. The bit that appears out of nowhere is when one gets inside the other. You've got this explosion of sparks. The brighter the explosion, the better the baby will be, the stronger the life force is. And you look at that and you think, okay, we can watch it, we can observe it, we can see it happening, but where the hell does the sparks come from? You know, it's one question leads to another question, leads to another question. But all the time, what I'm seeing is that you have to have the building blocks. You've got to do this and do that and do the other to make whatever it is that you want to happen.
No, but I mean, you always hear that DNA is maybe universal. It's universal. The whole universe it's a similar thing. And they just wonder who in the hell, what in the heck, was it God? Was it aliens? Was it somebody that figured? I don't know. The whole thing is so bizarre.
As long as there's ever been humans to observe it, the key has always been thought to be in mathematics. From some guy in a cave somewhere that's, producing a rattleback bone, which is an aerodynamically mathematical thing that existed in prehistory that only spins in one direction. This thing's amazing, and it's mathematics. That's pure mathematics that makes that function. From that guy who sat in a cave in the primitive times doing that right the way through to, the late Stephen Hawking, all of those people without doubt would say it's in the mathematics. It's in the structure. And that structure, as you rightly point out, is universal. So that doesn't just cover DNA. DNA is one particular biological branch of mathematical structure. It covers everything, absolutely everything, light, electricity, things that are invisible, visible, everything has order. It functions according to the way it's been set up.
Yeah, and doesn't DNA, basically degrades, mutates. So is that one of the reasons maybe we have constantly less perfect species here?
Everything is decaying. So very much like the chaos formula applies to everything, the formulas of decay apply to everything. These are the universal rules of life on planet Earth. They're things that you can't dodge. I think in part of the book, actually, I allude back to that. I think there's different bits of things from history that I've tried to pull out and illustrate that they were aware of these basic ground rules, a long time back. If DNA does mutate, then it becomes almost unsuitable to survive in the environment. The environment takes care of it. So mutations only usually survive for a generation or two. The classic example of that is, GM crops. As soon as we start producing GM crops, these perfect, crops in an imperfect world, as soon as they get out, as soon as they get loose, as soon as anything else gets in, it just makes a mess of it, destroys it, it dies, it can't survive.
It's fragile.
Yeah, it's fragile, exactly, because it's not got chaos in it. You have to factor chaos in because that's the world we live in. Yeah.
So do you think 1 million, sorry, Alex, do you think 1 million years from now we'll just have cockroaches and rats?
Yeah, I always joke about that. I say, you're going to have cockroaches, rats, and I'll be there to turn off the light, I don't think I'm ever going to pass away. No, joking aside, I think the Earth goes through phases, and back to the what Alex said about aliens coming from elsewhere and visiting. Wherever these guys are coming from, I think they're aware of the fact that we're winding down this particular phase, because the more you look at things in the past, even the meteorite that's created the crater that's the Gulf of Mexico, even that, it took out goodness knows how many species and probably the dinosaurs as well. But we're still here. This particular phase post that apocalypse, we're still here. Something will undoubtedly happen to us at some point. It'd be an asteroid or a tidal wave or a volcano or some little virus or bacteria that sorts out the men from the boys. Whatever happens will happen because it always happens. And again, we'll bounce back. There'll be something after that because that seems to be how things are set up. Or it depends on whether you believe that the aliens are suddenly going to come back or God's going to come back and, start it all again. That's a possibility. But even so, the argument remains it's still another phase. You're starting again. So I don't think a million years from now, we'll have probably gone through quite a few of these phases. And like you say, it'll be cockroaches, tardigrades, rats. You might find the odd rabbit, who knows?
So, Mark, it sounds like at some point there was a superior version of us, maybe more technologically advanced. Did something happen to them, like a meteor, or did they move on? Or
did we just kill each other?
Well,
some great war?
Or all of the above. I think all of those factors have played into it. The answer, though, to the fundamental question is yes, there were superior forms of us. Absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. You look at some of these enormous, we mentioned Eric von Daniken earlier on, these enormous skulls that Eric's featured in a lot of his books. These Paracas skulls are more than three times the capacity of the human brain now. So you can imagine if one of these guys gets born with the intellectual capabilities of Einstein, you've got three Einsteins stacked one on top of the other. Then you get 10 of them. You get 10 of them in a room, so you've now got 3 times 10 Einsteins. Some guy walks in and goes, "Oh, I fancy building a pyramid." They'll go, "Oh, hang on, give us a minute." Back of a serviette, they just do the mathematics. There you go. That's how you build a pyramid. Because the soft computing capabilities of these guys must have been absolutely off the Richter scale, which actually leads me to believe that they will have understood that extinction is inevitable. So I think if you met a race of these gentle giants, I think they would have actually realized they were going to die out. They were going to go. So a lot of what we find on planet Earth now, which is what they've left behind, things like pyramids, architecture, language, mathematics, it's all over the planet. These guys with the big heads were all over the planet. They turn up everywhere. Whatever's left behind is their legacy to us. But they must have known that they were, on a hiding to nowhere, because they will have observed death, and decay and destruction happening in the planet around them. So they'll be aware of it. It's back to this environmental awareness. Like I said, they fitted the planet so well that they were nearly always 99.9% of the time doing the right thing. Whereas we run around 99.9% of the time just having a good guess that maybe we're doing the right thing. And most of the time we're probably not. Oh, hang on. Oh, people living thousands of years. That's an interesting one, because actually I was going to go there anyway. I just spotted it pop up. Yes, people will have lived longer in the past, because the more perfect the planet is and the more perfect they are, the less decay and destruction and devolution would attack them. So that is absolutely, I'm not going to get biblical. I'm not going to go, before the flood and all that. I'm not going to go down that route. I'm not going to get biblical. Although it has to be said, there was 3,000 years before Noah built his ark. And at this point, since the last major disaster, we've only had 2,000 years. So if you look how far technology's come in 2,000 years, imagine what would have happened if we'd have had 3,000 years to now. So, don't be fooled. Noah's ark was probably some kind of super technology. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. And they all knew at that point exactly what they were doing, which we don't. I could do a whole radio broadcast on Noah's Ark. Don't get me started on that. But yes, yeah, I do firmly believe that, pre-flood. If you go back to, here's one for whoever it was. I can't remember who asked the question, but whoever asked the question, go and have a look at Genesis 1 verse 2. Where it says, in the beginning, was God. And then it says, and the earth was without form and void. If you look at without form and void, it's 2 Hebrew words, tohu and bohu. And both of those words are used as destruction at the displeasure of God. So as soon as you come in at the beginning of Genesis, bang, straight away, second verse, you're looking at a world that was destroyed at the displeasure of God. So he's building it, or it's building it, rebuilding it, if you like, out of this ball covered in water. So even creation itself is just the next phase. If you actually kind of get into your Hebrew and all that, it's another story. But if you go down that route, there's a lot of things that are answered by looking at that.
Well, how did ancient people know that we were so closely related to pigs? Because you look at a pig and you look at us and you go, there's nothing in common.
Well, this is the weird thing, isn't it? I mean, basically, there's Moses in the desert and he's getting these commandments from God, and he comes down from the mountain. He goes, right, fellas, that's it. You're not eating any more bacon. You've had it. Stop eating pigs. Wow. You know what I'm saying? Wow. That's
right.
Like
yeah, wow.
1,500 years BC, or at least maybe, 1,600 odd. And they already know that, it's cannibalism because you're eating something that's, not far off yourself. So you're like, whoa. Other things as well. These guys making the crystal skulls. How the heck?
To remind people, they just did a pig heart transplant into a human.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's like all the things that people laugh at, and they think, the Bible's a bag of nonsense and this, that, and the other. No, actually, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, that's Egyptian. that's Egyptian technology. Moses was an Egyptian, you know, he was second only to Pharaoh. So he had access to everything from Egypt. And when you start looking at those books in that kind of light, you, as an archaeologist in particular, you're like, okay, these Egyptians, you know, there's a Saqqara glider, this little tiny thing that looks like Horus, but it flies perfectly. You've got Eric von Daniken's amazing electrical light bulbs, you know, you got the Baghdad battery. Was that used? Did they have electricity? You know, were they using woolly mammoths to build the pyramids and drag blocks up there? You know, how the hell do you
we don't really even know what the pyramids were for. Were they transmitters?
Yes, 300-ton blocks they're moving. You know, they're drilling holes that are the size of footballs, you know, for miles through rocks, and they're doing all sorts of crazy things.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, hang on a minute, well, Moses came out in the middle of that, so of course he's going to know a thing or two about a thing or two, you know.
You realize, okay, just to give an example of the pyramids, and I always tell people this story because I use pyramid math to create holograms.
Yes.
And so, and then it hits you, and you're like, what in the hell did they know back then?
Well, it's the most amazing thing is when you stick all the missing bits back on the Great Pyramid of Cheops, which incidentally I think is a bit older than that, but when you stick all the missing bits back on, you know, you've got one of them that's black, one of them that's white, another one that's pink. You look at all the angles, you put the gold capstone back on and all that. And only then did they start to function. There was a canal all the way around the bottom of it. So it was, you know, sat on water and all this, that, and the other. Back to the computer recreations again. It's only in very, very, very recent times that we've begun to understand just how advanced these things are. You know, I mean, back in the 1970s, you could build a pyramid. You could have a little pyramid, you know, made of whatever, shove a razor blade under one side and it would resharpen the blade. Well, it works.
Does it work? Have you tried it?
Yeah, it definitely works. I mean, I've been inside that pyramid. I've been in the King's Chamber. I've had a look at the shaft and one or two other bits and bobs. Absolutely no way is that a burial chamber. Absolutely no way. There's a lot of other things going on there.
Yeah, wasn't this just parasitic cultures that used them or didn't know what they were for and just thought, oh, this would be a great place to bury my king?
Well, the first invaders, the Greeks, when the Greeks got there, they wrote about the pyramids. I think they're the first people to actually record them, and they were just absolutely amazed. They had no concept whatsoever of what these things were, and they still had some of the outer coating stones on them at that point, about 360 BC. So a couple of thousand years ago, they were still there as one of the wonders of the world. But when they spoke to the Egyptians actually said, "Nah, we've had these things here for thousands of years." The implication, actually, I think was like 5,000, 6,000, 7,000.
They had built them.
Well, no, they had them. They've been sat there for that long. I'm not sure we're getting a handle on just how old they are in terms of building. I mean, I've been to the Sphinx. I've looked at the Sphinx. I've had a look at the hole it sits in. As a geologist, I can tell you that hole at some point has been inundated with water. There's no doubt whatsoever there's been water in there. The Sphinx is damaged by water. The pit's damaged by water. The last time there was any rain in that desert was about 10,000 BC.
10,000 years.
You know, 10,500 BC. And there's one or two other folks out there that have done work on this, and they reckon that the constellation of Leo, it was pointing, the Sphinx was facing the constellation of Leo in about 10,500 BC. So now you're starting to get into enormous figures, you know, figures of biblical proportions, dare I say, you know.
I was just gonna go back, and there's, you know, some discussion in the chat room about whether, I mean, what evidence is there, if any, of people living so long, like 1,000 years or 500 or whatever, you know, way beyond what we can live?
Wow, that's
evidence. Is obviously there's writings.
Well, I'm gonna try and stick to the physical evidence, and yes, you're right. There's an awful lot of written material, and it would appear that a lot of what we've got has been handed down from one generation to another, to another, to another. So the time periods that covers are usually enormous. I mean, I'm trying to steer clear of just sticking to biblical stuff here. Look at Plato's Atlantis. You know, it was Plato's great grandfather that went to Egypt and spoke to the guys in the temple there. And when he spoke to the guys in the temple there, they said, "Oh yeah, we have this, you know, big cataclysm or whatever. It wipes out. Atlantis goes down. That's about 6,000 or 7,000 BC or whatever." But they said, "We've got written records going back 12, 13, 14,000, and they're relatively recent to us." So you're like, really? You've got written records in Egypt that go back to like 12,000, 13, 14,000, 15,000 BC. And the Egyptians are saying that they're relatively recent. So you're like, wow. So just exactly what did we lose in the library at Alexandria? You know, what exactly has been, you know, sacked and destroyed and burnt and etc.
Right.
You know, we are so poor. And the reason all that information survived, as you say, is because from generation to generation to generation, these guys with the enormous heads must have had tremendous memories. You know, they would remember where things were, even stars in the sky, if that's what they specialized in. They'd have tremendous amounts of memory available to them. So they would just pass that down, you know, and so on and so on.
Your theories make a ton of sense, especially based on the DNA. How basically we're just getting more and more corrupt.
Yeah, we are not as good as we once were. I mean,
we used to be.
Well, you know, the other thing that always bothered me is like everybody I know's got a bad back.
Yeah.
You would think that we would have evolved like Darwin. We would have evolved to have stronger backs. You know, every generation's got a stronger back than the previous generation.
Exactly.
It's going the other direction. I mean, we are falling apart. I mean, go into a Walmart.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, at the end of the day as well, you've got to look at if you could imagine that you could live extremely well with the world around you, and one or two people have done this, people in Tibet, China, what have you, they've got in tune with their environment. You know, I think one guy lived to some ridiculous age, 130, and he drank tea. And so he said, oh, it's tea. That's what's keeping me alive. That having been said, I'm pretty sure there's another guy somewhere out in China that smoked like a chimney and drank like a fish, and he still lived to 100 and something ridiculous age. But at the end of the day, if we avoid stuff like that and we're in tune with our environment and we're doing the best we can do, actually, there isn't any reason really for us to die quickly. You know, a lot of what we're doing and the way we're living is what's causing us to die at a quicker rate.
Right.
I mean, we can't do anything about the fact we're living in the nuclear age.
Well, you look at other animals. You look at a Greenland shark. They could, you know, they're suspecting that some of them may be 2,000 to 3,000 years old.
Well, yeah, and then you've got octopus, whales. You've got undersea life of all kinds that live to colossal ages. Best of the lot, my personal favourite, are trees. Nobody seems to think of trees as living creatures, but you know, they actually define how we date things. You know, the bristlecone pine trees. They use
some of those that are 10,000 years old.
Yeah, they use it to calibrate radiocarbon dating. You know, where carbon increases and decreases. They are incredibly ancient. And then, of course, you get the U parts. You always get this thing where, you know, something turns up, like there's a fossilized hadrosaur, I think, that turned up recently. You know, which theoretically shouldn't exist if evolution works, but this thing is, you know, biologically intact. You know, it's still got the food in its stomach. It's got scales. It's got skin. It's got DNA. You know, things like that. Things like that turn up, and you start thinking, "Hang on a minute. Things are not as we perceive them to be. Things do last longer. They can last longer. You know, there is a longer survival rate possible."
I came across a cedar tree the other day on a bike ride that I know was at least 5,000 years old.
Yeah, we have yew trees here.
And I just wanted to touch it, so I just put my hands on it, just because. The respect, this thing's been living here 5,000 years.
Yes. I mean, you're talking about living creatures.
Living creatures. And I just
they qualify as archaeology. That's archaeology, you know. I mean, archaeologists don't kind of. I mean, well, we do over here actually. We've got churches, chapels built inside enclosures, especially in Wales, and the enclosures are Druid enclosures, so we know they date from Roman times. And very often these enclosures have got rings of yew trees. And the average age of the yew trees are sort of 3,000 to 5,000 years. So the yew tree is actually part of the archaeology of the site. So we've learned over here over quite a number of years now to respect trees. You can use trees for dating. You know, oak trees, yew trees, all different trees that have long lives can give you a clue to the age of something, you know.
Well, then we're also now we're just discovering that the mycelium and the fungus are basically supercomputers that are communicating over hundreds of miles, maybe, or thousands. They don't even know.
Yeah, and I was reading the other day, if a tree goes down, the other trees can continue to feed it. So if a tree collapses, they will rally round and start to put nutrients into the tree that potentially could die till that tree, you know, reshoots again. It comes back, and then they'll back off and they'll start, you know, looking after themselves.
And that trees will talk to each other that are maybe 50 miles apart. They'll communicate with each other. There's just so much cool stuff we don't know.
Well, this is the world I think that we're rediscovering. There's been so much chaos, like I say, meteorite strikes, tidal waves, whatever, in the past. So much stuff has been lost and destroyed. And, the idea that we're devolving, I think back in the past, they already knew the information.
Well, they did, because I'll talk about that with one of my Native American friends, and they'll go like, well, I heard that story when I was a little kid from my grandmother.
Absolutely, I rest my case. You're on the right continent to do that. The natives over in this country, the Celts, there aren't any really that have survived unaffected. But you have a native population there that will have a huge, absolutely enormous amount of valuable information about the past. Enormous amount.
Yeah, and it's funny that we're just discovering. We're just kind of like it's all new, but to them, it's like, we always knew that.
Yeah. As I say, it's a case for most of us. It's a case of rediscovery. We're rediscovering something that they already knew. There's an element of that in the book, Crystal Skulls and Human Heads. There's an element of that. There's a thread running through it, like I say, where I've tried to pick out times in history where it becomes glaringly obvious that people in the past knew something that we're sort of we've just stumbled over it. That is a deliberate intention in the book.
Yeah, and I love talking about the bigger picture of, because obviously you have this great interest in all these things, and I get where you came from when you wrote your book, and I can't wait to read it. I have not read it yet, but I'm going to.
Oh,
I haven't read it yet. It just hasn't. It hasn't happened. So many times we have authors on, I like to read the book after I talk to them.
Well, you'll enjoy it because you could probably get through it. Put yourself a tall beer or whatever your favourite beverage is. Go and sit on the veranda within a rocking chair on a nice afternoon. Maybe give yourself a couple of hours up to sunset or whatever, and just have a crack at it. You'll get through it in the space of 2.5, 3 hours max. But there'll be a lot of wow moments. I could imagine people scribbling things in the margin. I won't get upset if people do. There'll be a lot of stuff that you need to follow up, as it were. It's a really good starting point, but it's not an end in itself.
So, have they done Kirlian photography on any of these crystal skulls? Which is, I don't even know if Kirlian photography is a legitimate science. It seems like it is in the things that I've seen.
Yeah, it picks up the electrical field.
Yes.
If it's done correctly, it will show you
voltage.
What the discharge is. Basically. They've done it on quartz. I've got photographs of actual quartz crystals discharging, but I've got to be honest, I have not seen an image anywhere of a skull. But that might be just literally a case of somebody with a skull hasn't bumped into anybody with a Kirlian camera yet. Sooner or later it's going to happen. It'll happen at a Mind Body Spirit fair somewhere, and somebody will do it. But as far as I'm aware, nobody's done it yet. So hey, there's a challenge to the listeners and the viewers, isn't it? If you happen to have one of these skulls and you're at a Mind Body Spirit, shove it in a bag, take it down there, and ask some guy with a Kirlian camera to do it. Chances are they'd do it for nothing. They'd be like, oh yeah, I'm up for doing that. Let's do that. Get the photograph and then bang it out on the internet. Get it out there and show what the results are. That's full on experimental archaeology. Dead simple to do.
So, Alex,
Mark, what about you, Mark? Would you be willing to put your skull?
I mean, I've just not been in that position. If the skulls are there at Awakening, the expo, and there's some guy there with a Kirlian camera, I'd be delighted. Be like, yeah, go on there, have a go, see what you get. Somebody somewhere now has got to do it.
If you were here right now with your camera or with your skull, we'd be like two little kids.
Oh yeah,
5 days, because I'd come up with 100 things we could do to your poor skull to try to.
As long as the archaeology says, as long as it's non-invasive,
Yeah, it would be non-invasive. Yeah.
At first.
I'd keep my files and drills on the table.
And big holes in it.
That's for the end of the night.
No.
That having been said, actually, I read recently they've come up with a way of actually using a similar method to that to date stone. This blew me mind. This, if you can find out what the general water content is of a piece of stone, because there's a certain element of water inside, quartz. When it's carved, it starts to lose moisture from its surface. And there's some guys over here now that are looking at the rate of moisture loss as a means of estimating whether it's like, tens of years, hundreds of years, or thousands of years by just doing comparison. So I'm thinking that is an amazing thing to know. Sooner or later, it's going to happen very, very quickly. We're going to have this means to actually get hold of these crystal skulls and go, what is the water content of quartz? How much water have they got on the surface? And then just do a straightforward comparison. Obviously, there's a bit more technology involved in that, but then we'll have dates. So like if mine's 500 years old, it'll come back as 500 years old. If it was made yesterday, it'll come back as 10 years. At least you'll have some way of doing that. So, but no, won't be drilling any holes in mine anytime soon.
no, there was none of those thoughts.
Yeah,
but a lot of other ones I could tell you.
I mean, one of the most striking things, if we did have the skull, or you had it over there, you look at it and it's smaller than life size, and it's just, a quartz crystal skull. You go to pick it up, it's twice as heavy as you expect it to be, because there's a high metal content in lead crystal. It's got this heavy weight. So you pick it up and you're like, oh, that's pretty heavy. And once you've picked it up, you realize it's permanently freezing cold. So there are actual physical tactile properties to this, there's a picture of it somewhere in the book. It's a full page picture, and it's somewhere in the middle of it. You never know, bit of technology, you might be able to find it. But it does look
your cover, Mark. Is this your skull?
No, that's a copy of the Mitchell Hedges skull.
The Mitchell Hedges skull.
And how was this photography done for this particular skull?
Well, that particular one's a happy accident. I had this idea of having like the physical remains of a human being trapped inside the bigger picture, as it were, which is the crystal skull, as a spiritual thing. So I did a mock-up. I created a mock-up and sent it into the publisher, and I said, this is what I want the cover to look like, something similar to this. He went, yes, thank you very much, that'll do, fantastic, we'll have that, we'll boost up the DPI, we'll shove it on the cover, that'll do fine. I'm like, all right then, okay. It's not quite what I had in mind. So I actually designed that. It's an overlay of rather cleverly done two images to make it appear there's one trapped inside the other. But that front cover skull is very, very similar, if not the same as the one on the front of Arthur C. Clarke's book. It has, except it's got the other one inside it. So
yeah, no, I could imagine myself beaming a hologram on the inside of it. So it's one thing you can do with holograms. You can penetrate planes. It would be really cool to project one right on the inside of it to see what it would do.
I think that would work on the Mitchell Hedges skull because it's essentially clear. There's not a lot inside it. There's some.
They don't have to be clear though. I can project it in a solid block of steel.
Oh, okay. Well, the one I've got a lot of detail inside it. So whether it would scatter the hologram, I'm not entirely sure. But
no, it doesn't. No, I've been experimenting. No, you can basically make any solid disappear, and I can make something on the inside of it.
Ooh, I like the sound of that. I do like the sound of that a lot. Yeah, I know the Chinese and Japanese now have got a way of actually manifesting holograms. I know they're like miles ahead of us in terms of what they can do. So they can literally put a 3D object pretty much anywhere now, using holograms.
And then I would imagine there could be just a huge amount of frequency tests that could be done with sounds that would be totally non-invasive. Yeah. That would be fascinating to then measure any electricity that comes off it.
Well, yes, absolutely.
Sounds and, on and on and on. I'm just saying, if you were over here and we had a case of beer, it would be.
Well, listen, if I ever do a US tour, if I ever get out there, I mean, I'd be delighted if there's anybody out there who thinks, we'll have him for a speaking tour, whenever. Get in contact with me through Facebook on Messenger. Send me a message, keep it simple, and we can go to emails and work something out. Because I'd be delighted to come out and do something. That would be, and bring the skull with me. I mean, it'd be nice to bring it out there.
That would be so cool. That'd be beyond cool. Gee, Alex does this 3-way camera thing, and I'm like looking through a keyhole.
Well, that was quite funny then, because two of us appeared and he vanished. Oh dear.
Yeah, this is the camera nightmare. All right, so bad backs. Let's talk about bad backs for a minute again, because it's almost as if we were brought here. Because damn, I'm telling you, that's just so much proof.
Yeah.
How do you explain the bad backs we all have?
Well, when you think about what starts going wrong, then people who are geneticists who are looking at the genetics think that there's definitely a ticking clock wired into that genetic code. They have managed. The good news is they have managed to switch it off, But the problem there is that when you turn it off, you get problems elsewhere in the DNA strand. So actually, it doesn't make you live longer. It makes you live half the amount of time. So they've not completely sussed that one out yet. But it's definitely in the genetics. It's in the DNA now that we devolve. You know, we are, as it were, programmed to gradually get worse and worse. I mean, I asked a mate of mine, I said, you know, what's it like to grow old? You know, typical kind of question young people ask. And he kind of looked very wisely at me and he went, it hurts.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Exactly.
okay, yeah. And you know what? He's not wrong. Yeah.
It takes courage to get old, Alex.
It does. Oh, you've got all this to come, flipping out.
I always tease that Alex is 50.
Yeah. Hey, he's looking really good for 50. He might be.
He
Might
says
like 150 if he keeps
moisturizer.
out.
it's the moisturizer.
Oil of ugly.
Yeah, you gotta use a lot of moisturizer. Okay. Anyhow, so mystery apes all over the world. What are you must have thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, there's a whole group now. I think it's, what do they call them? Cryptids, is it? Where they have these,
yeah,
you know, Sasquatch, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, Bigfoot, Sasquatch.
Bigfoot. Yeah, you know what?
Deck.
I don't have a problem with that because if you think about extinction as a process, there always has to be the last of something. You know, I mean, over here, the famous one is the Loch Ness Monster. You know, maybe it's the last plesiosaur or it's the last colony of plesiosaurs. Well, I mean, America's massive. You know, it's absolutely enormous. I mean, we Brits don't quite grasp it. You know, you could get 2 or 3 British Isles in a state. You know, so out there, you have so much space to lose something in. That, you know, I don't have a problem with that. There is absolutely every possibility that there is a species. The medieval people knew it as hairy men and hairy women. This species, you know, could very well be in America. The interesting thing is, I mentioned one in the book, actually, the Hairy Men of Mandalay. They were alive up to the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s out in China. They lived in the mountainous regions of China, and they had hair all over the body. Absolutely everywhere, palms of the hands, the lot. They actually look like the traditional kind of Hollywood werewolf, you know, the way the face is and all that. They now have, to all intents and purposes, vanished. And I rather suspect things like the Vietnam War, etc., you know, did so much destruction in that area that they're just now extinct like everything else. But there's no reason why, as a species, those hairy people couldn't survive somewhere else, you know, Africa, America, South America. You know, there's plenty of space. You know, I think we kind of we tend to forget just how big planet Earth is. You know, we kind of rattle around in it. You know, Africa's enormous. They don't even show it as big as it really is on maps. You know, it's a massive landmass, and America is a massive landmass. You know, funnily enough, I think it was mostly Brits that did the early maps, so we tended to make the British Isles look a bit bigger. You know, like,
I've never heard that one.
You never heard that before. Yeah, a lot of the
yeah.
early European map makers tended to make Europe and the British Isles look bigger.
You really think somebody actually elbowed the guy next to him and said, "Hey, let's make that let's shrink North America down a bit there." Yeah,
I mean, we're tiny compared to, you know, relatively to other land masses. We're a tiny little country. But we had an empire, you know. Let's not forget that we had an empire once upon a time.
Have you taken any time to, you know, just realize how many Bigfoot reports? I mean, we're dealing with 8,000 documented sightings at this point.
I think very quickly Bigfoot is going to almost outstrip the Greys, you know, the guys that are in the UFOs. You're going to finish up with so many people coming forward now saying, yes, we've seen them, we've heard them, we've encountered them. You know, I think it's going to proportionately increase to the point where there's just going to be no doubt. I mean, sooner or later, I say sooner or later, I was watching a program the other day, they've got fur, they've got skin, they've got blood where one of these trod on a screw, you know, and it left its blood behind. You're going to finish up with DNA, you know, you're going to finish up identifying, and I'm going to predict this, identifying
what was the show with the screw and the blood? What?
Yeah, some guy had left it. He was doing something to his door. He'd screwed a panel off his door and left it. And it's in a famous area. It's in a wooded area where there's cabins, what have you. And he'd left this thing on the porch.
I'm laughing because that was me.
Was that you?
That was me. That was,
am I telling you your own story then? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was on TV. We had it over here. I think it was on one of the American USA.
It was on Blaze,
things.
probably Blaze TV over
Yeah,
there.
it will be. Yeah. Oh gosh. Oh. Well, there you go. You see, doesn't that show I pay attention?
Yeah.
Anyway, this thing had trod on the screw and left a deposit behind. I remember that very vividly.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking, yeah, definitely they're going to find another species there without any doubt whatsoever. I'm so pleased to meet you. Hello.
It reminded me one time I was in New York.
Yeah.
And an executive made me watch my own show.
Oh, that's great.
And said, now you need to find this guy.
Yeah.
And I was sitting with two of my television agents.
Oh, that's
and they were all just looking at me, elbowing me, and saying, well, okay, we're just going to sit and let this woman embarrass herself. And she lectured us for an hour on how we need to make our show just like this.
Well, at least you didn't make me suffer there.
No,
I would have told you the whole
right.
story, and you would have told me that it was right or wrong, I guess. But hey,
that's funny.
But when I was doing television over here, that happened quite a lot. People you'd be stood at the checkout, with your shopping going out the door, and someone would look at you like that, and you'd look back, and then they'd look at you, and then as I'm leaving, I'd usually sort of lean over to them and go, "Yes, I am." Oh dear.
I was at a gas station the other day, and a kid who waited on me said, "Are you Professor Meldrum?" I went, "What? Chuck Meldrum? He's this anthropologist. I don't look anything like him, but I've done a number of shows with him."
Yeah,
he just got the name mixed up or whatever.
I mean, with a face like this, it's pretty difficult to get mixed up with anybody else. But very often I do get mixed up with myself. That happens all the time. But
so,
oh dear.
So tell us now about the book in specific. What part of your book are you just super, I don't know, you think it's super interesting, or something that you really were proud of when you got done writing it?
I think it is the section where I start to look at quartz. I start to look at quartz silica, which would be crystal heads. I think it's the chapter crystal heads, because I went into that very much as most people do, with this passing knowledge of crystal skulls and what crystal skulls are all about. And then while I was producing the chapter, boy, did I get an appreciation of what silica is all about. There's a bit in there which I record the fact that they mocked up the planet Earth and tried to solve Olsen's paradox, which is this idea that when you have an iron core, the planet just doesn't function correctly. The magnetism, the electricity, the gravity, the way it's spinning, everything just goes completely to pot. So they had this thing called Olsen's paradox. Some bright spark said, well, why don't you stick silica in there? Why don't we try quartz and see what that does? So they shoved that in. Not only did it work and solve Olsen's paradox, but they got to the point where they could actually predict that it was probably amethyst. So they could be that specific. And I'm thinking, whoa, hang on a minute. We've got silica inside us, and that helps the brain development and the skull development before the baby's born. So that relates to the head. You've got the head. The head itself is alive. That's where in ancient times they used to think the soul lived and where the person lived and all the rest of it, which they then in turn applied to the planet, which is what the green man represents, the foliate head, the foliate face. That's the living life force, if you like, the consciousness of planet Earth. And planet Earth turns out to be this giant quartz crystal spinning through space. So you've got like quartz, 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 and a whole lot just linked up. I got to the end of that chapter and I'm like, whoa, I didn't see that coming. So in that sense, yeah, that whole crystal skulls and human heads kind of, the crystal skulls element of it, that just blew me away. That was
kind of came together for you at that point.
Well, yeah, I it's, as they say, it's great when a plan comes together, and boy, in that chapter, it was just like one thing after another, after another, after another. And it's the knowledge of archaeology and the knowledge of history combining with the knowledge of science and then the new discoveries.
But you seem like the type, Mark, that would write a book and actually, I just get this feeling that you would you tap into the universe, as they say.
I do have moments where...
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Sometimes I look at it and I think, that piece of information is a gift. It's come from somewhere else. It's not an accident that I stumbled on, articles in Nature, articles in British Archaeology, things like that. Yeah, of course, there's loads of information out on the internet, but you don't know how reliable any of that is. So science is very reserved. It's like it holds back. It can take 10, 20, 30 years for something to come out. And some of the information that I was picking up on, I'm thinking, wow, this is just, it's there when I need it, So yeah, I do tend to look at that. If anyone gets Revealing the Green Man, which is another book I've got out, which is on Amazon, that I think as a book has more of that in it. That's a flow. I wrote it in one go. I don't know quite what happened that particular weekend. I just got stuck in, and that just flowed.
What's the book about?
It's literally about the Green Man. It's about this male face that has leaves all the way around it that's green, that you find all over the world, and it appears a lot in medieval iconography. And if somebody said, is there a partner to Crystal Skulls and Human Heads, I'd say go and have a look at Revealing the Green Man, because where Crystal Skulls is the science, it's the modern side of it, it's the archaeoscience side of it. The other one, Revealing the Green Man, that really does hit on the spirituality. It looks at the spiritual side of it and what they thought of the earth, in days gone by. So if you get those two, they're both easy reading. They're both about the same length. You pretty much get the full picture with both of those two. So, yeah.
So let's talk about the Anunnaki and all your thoughts and theories or whatever on that.
Yeah, roll away.
Yeah.
Anunnaki, that's an interesting one. I struggle with it as a label. Okay. We've got to be very careful of having a certain idea, having a certain impression, a certain image of what something is. So you've got these kind of alien, Atlantean super beings, mega technology, all the rest of it. You're almost into the Marvel comic superhero realms with that. That's not where I'm coming from with any resemblance of how I might visualize the Anunnaki. I believe that there are super beings, super races, that have been around in the past. The labels for me don't really concern me that much. I don't want to really pigeonhole them. I think they were as diverse in different species and different ways as we are now. So it'd be very, very difficult. You might bump into a guy that's got one of these giant heads who's like 8 foot tall, and he's a scientist. But then you might bump into another one and he's an astrologer. Bump into another one, he specializes in the ocean. Bump into another one, he's a forester and he looks after the forest, etc. I think they were as diverse as we are today. So to have a fixed idea of a race of, super beings that are a particular way. Everybody goes back to Babylon. They all look at the Babylonian carvings and, guys with beaks and wings and, or if you go down the biblical route and a lot of other routes, you've got angels with wings and all this kind of thing. And the, beings coming down and doing all sorts of strange things with the daughters of men and all this. I don't go down that route. That's not where it's at for me. Like some guy said earlier on, is there any evidence around for the great age that people used to live to? Well, there's no evidence at all for those kind of Anunnaki. There just isn't. They don't exist in that form, is what I'm saying. That term, go back to by all means, go back to Babylon, go back to Egypt, go back as far as you can, whatever. But you've got to stay aware of the fact that you're dealing with a diverse human species. It's very easy to just literally go off, excuse the term, away with the fairies. You just go off and just let your imagination run wild. Yeah, you do that, but I'm very much factual based. That having been said, like you say, I'm fully aware of the paranormal and the spiritual side of it, etc., etc. I take account of that in everything that I write. So don't for a minute think that this book's, some kind of scientific textbook, because it definitely isn't. But at the same time, I'm still matter of fact. I think I said earlier, it's like shoot, it's a duck. It looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, then it's a duck. If it's there in the archaeological record, then yes, you can investigate that and push into that.
So one, you think they were real, but maybe not alien. Maybe they were indigenous.
Yeah, in a nutshell. And again, it's the term alien. Yes, we'd find them extremely alien. If one of those guys, for example, the Paracas, if somewhere in the jungle there is a race of those guys with the heads that survive, then if one of those ever decides to come wandering out of the jungle, we're automatically going to assume that it's an alien from Venus and it came down in something that looks like a light shade, because that's our way of thinking of things. But quite clearly, that's not what it is. So that's why I say be very cautious of labels. It's dead easy to just throw a word out and then have all the associations associated with that word coming with it. And again, be very careful, because what means one thing to one person doesn't mean the same thing to another. So just to clarify it, in my case, I'm not dealing necessarily with extraterrestrials. They don't come from Mars or Venus or anything like that. But yes, there were super races, absolutely no doubt about it, with super technology capable of doing things in the past that we nowadays can't do. That's a fact. The physical evidence is there to support that.
And even capable of enslaving people and same things that we did.
Well, again, it's everybody looks at that and they go, slavery, it's a bad thing, get rid of it. What about the Roman Empire? The Roman Empire and other empires that have had slaves. Well, there was no social security system. There was no way of supporting people that had no other means of operating. So in a sense, it was a catch net. But the way it was operated, if you study history, if you look at Roman rules and Celtic rules and a lot of social rules about slavery, boy, was it regulated. It was very strictly regulated under the Roman Empire. And slaves could get out of slavery. There were ways of working at it, things you could do, and you could exit slavery at a point where you were capable of supporting yourself. So tens of millions of people would have died had slavery not existed in the past. Nowadays, and I'm going to get quite radical in this and perhaps a little political, nowadays, slavery still exists, but it goes under other labels, in this country, and I make no bones about it, they absolutely tax us into the ground. Nobody has any freedom over here. Anything you do, no matter what you do, there is a tax associated with it, and that is a form of slavery. Right. That's what it is. It keeps people down. So all we've done is we've just, like I say, back to words again, Anunnaki, alien, ancient creature, human, whatever, back to the same labels again, slavery, 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 slavery. It doesn't mean the same thing in every time period. And that's really important to appreciate that. It really is. So maybe, yes, I would say they probably did have slaves in the past, but I think in an ideal setting, they would have had humans with specific functions. They wouldn't have done it on a measure of intelligence. They would have done it on capabilities. As I said, you got, 10 of these guys who are 35 foot tall and absolutely enormous. They just come along, pick a stone up and shove it in where you want it, But again, you've got these little tiny guys who are only 3'6", but they're fully adult. They must have been incredible miners. Get them into a copper mine and they can go into little places where nobody else can go. I say that because we have a copper mine over here, and the archaeologists are like, oh, this must have been mostly dug by children because all the tunnels are too small for us to get down. Nonsense. They just use small adults. Shoot, it's a duck. Oh, what's this? My rubber ducky looks like a duck and quacks like a duck. Yet it isn't actually a duck. Weird sense of humour.
It's rubber.
I'll tell you what, though, if it's floating on my pond and I think it's a duck, I'll shoot it. Oh dear.
Okay. So time travel. Do you think it's happened? Ever happened? Gonna happen?
Well, back to your evidence again. There's enough circumstantial evidence to suggest that there's a possibility that it has. All over the internet. I mean, yeah, I know all about Photoshop and all that kind of nonsense, but there's loads of images where you just think, whoa, what's that guy in 1860 on that photograph doing with a mobile phone? And these things happen. Einstein, I'm a huge fan of Einstein because I think, although he had enormous capacities, I think he knew his limits. But he talked about time not being linear. He talked about it folding and coming back and touching itself and crossing over. And, I don't think we've got a grasp of it. And I think if you took Einstein to one side and asked him, he would definitely say we don't have a grasp of it. We don't have an understanding of how it works, how it functions, what it does, where it's going. So time travel, I think it is possible. And it's possible that these guys that are whizzing around in UFOs or UAPs, whatever you want to call them, that they've actually got it sussed. They've sorted it out. I can't wait for somebody to be abducted, and them actually open the windows in the flying saucer and go, have a look out of there, there's the fall of the Roman Empire, there's Krakatoa going off, and Atlantis sinking and all this, that, and the other. I'm quite sure that they, whether it's interdimensional or whether they're mucking about with time or, whatever, I'm sure they would have been capable of doing something like that. Again, you've got all this weird stuff. I mean, there's a absolutely brilliant story in Ezekiel in the Old Testament. There's this little prophet guy sat there. We know that Ezekiel as a book is at least 2,000 years old. And he's sat there and he sees these whirling wheels coming at him, across the desert. There they go. And they're heading towards him. Now, of course, everybody automatically goes, oh, flying saucers. A friend of mine had read this. And it says, one has the face of a bear, another's got the face of an eagle, another one has the face of a man, it's wheels within wheels and they're spinning and they're flying across the desert. He was watching footage of the Vietnam War and the helicopters that were firing missiles in the Vietnam War. One had a badge on it, which was one was a buffalo, one was an eagle, one was a bear, one had the face of a man, he's watching these things and he's like, that's what Ezekiel could see. There's this guy sat there in whatever it was, 600, 700, 800 BC, writing his prophecy, and he could see down the tunnel of time as far as helicopters. That's like 2,000 years. I mean, that was in the 1970s, that particular guy shared that piece of wisdom with me. And then, now, we've got that Egyptian temple that appears to have carvings in the hieroglyphs of a helicopter.
It's so exact, too. It isn't like it's...
Yeah.
What else could it be?
It's just not by accident, is it? But again, back to, the source, the Bible, back then when they were actually doing that carving.
Isn't there also kind of a jet-looking airplane on there too?
Yeah, they've got other symbols as well. I think it's Dendara. It's up in the carvings of Dendara. I've actually been there, but I went there before anybody pointed out it was there. So I'm stood there, and I completely missed it. But that's the story of my life. So, but it's there. It's definitely there. But you look at these prophecies, all these people, go to any religion, go to Islam, go to Judaism, go to Christianity, go to some of the pagan religions, look at people like Nostradamus, go wherever you want to go. And there are human beings that have been alive on planet Earth that have left behind them hard, datable evidence that clearly shows time was irrelevant to them. They had come up with some way of cheating time. They could see it, but obviously they couldn't interfere with it. Back to that paradox again. Obviously they obeyed certain rules. They wrote what they saw. They did it in a cryptic fashion. And like we understand what they clearly didn't understand. Oh, bird carving that is so obviously an aeroplane and not a bird. Yeah. I've just got that coming up. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in archaeology, parts, again, stuff that pops up, and you think, now we know what it is, but did they know what it was when they actually did it?
Mark, is it possible, if we were so advanced at some point in our timeline, way more advanced than we are now, and we knew the end was coming, some event was going to happen. Is it possible that as a group that they escaped the timeline? Like if we were so advanced and you knew a meteor was going to hit, you knew something was going to wipe us out, that you could actually manipulate time enough to...
Well, it's only my opinion, but I think the answer to that is probably yes. I think there probably is a way to survive what's coming. But at the same time, the answer's also no, because whatever's coming, in a sense, is predestined. Now, that's a nasty word because as human beings, we have no idea what it means. Predestination. What the hell's that? All we know is that it's fixed. We can't tamper with it. There's no way of changing it. So there are certain things which quite clearly we're not able to change. There's nothing we can do about it. But as you rightly say, we can plan for that sort of thing. They've got the seed bank, I think, up in the North Pole. Or is it Antarctica? I can't remember exactly where it is. Frozen seed bank. They've got all of the species they can possibly gather, which, funnily enough, is smacks of Noah's Ark. They've done the same thing, but they've done it in modern times in a modern way. That kind of tells you that they are anticipating something. chaos formula, statistically, sooner or later, something is going to happen. It might be more simple than that, actually. I mean, I've kind of got this idea that one of these days the sun is going to cough, and this massive solar flare is going to come flying across the universe at us, and all our silica, is just going to go, and that's it. No more microchips, no more phones. Yeah, you name it. Satellites dropping out the sky and all that. That's more likely.
What do you think will happen in that case? What will happen to civilization?
I'm gonna have to send you a carrier pigeon in order to do an interview.
Yeah.
It's gonna be like,
would we ever get out of it again, or would we just go back to cave people?
Well, I don't know, maybe about 20, 30 years ago, archaeologists realized that rather than printed books, which you can pass on for hundreds of years, there was going to be this problem. I'm going back to the days of the Commodore, the BBC, the Amstrad, these early format computers. There was going to be a problem getting data from one period to another and from one generation to another. That was going to be a problem. As you say, we're now at the stage where we can write stuff into glass and it'll out-survive the human race. So that's kind of solved that. It's not like a relay race anymore, but in a sense it still is, because we're still trying to pass information on. So I'm pleased that people are buying my books in print, because that information might survive. On the other hand, if we solely rely on, oh yeah, I've got it on my phone,
put it on ebooks, put everything on ebooks.
It's on ebooks. I've got it on my laptop, oh yeah, it'd be fine. I've gone through about 4 towers, these big, real chunky terabyte computers. They go down quite regularly, and I've had to bounce data just over the last few years, just to keep it together. Like you say, I don't know how we're going to survive.
But what do you think will happen? So let's say we lose every chip, every computer, everything. Just push.
Exactly the same thing that happened.
Do we survive as a race?
Yeah, it's going to be like the library at Alexandria. I mean, the purpose behind that was that the Greeks put a call out and said every single book or document or scroll or whatever anybody's got out there, send it to the library. We'll get it copied and we'll send it you back. And then we've got it as a library. So I think that there's a potential that could happen again. If we get to the point where the only thing that's surviving are books in people's houses and things like that, we're going to have to go back to relying on something that's physical. So at the same time as people who are scientifically inclined and, technologically inclined tend to rely on electronics and stuff like that, others amongst us are still relying on physical actual stuff.
I realize that, Mark, but what I'm getting at, will 1 billion people die within 2 weeks after probably silicon chips are fried?
No, it wouldn't. I don't think it would happen like that. I really don't.
What do you think will happen? I'm just curious. You're a smart guy. I just want to hear your opinion.
Okay, well, they'd have to ground everything. They'd ground all the airplanes and all the rest of it. Yes, there's going to be a couple of people that would die in accidents. The odd aircraft will come down, the odd car will crash because it's, etc.
I'm not talking short term. I'm talking long term. What happens? Because we all rely on the grocery store.
I've got to say, we'd just have to reinvent ourselves. We would have to go back to doing what we were doing, before the technology we've got now. The advantage we've got is that the technology we've got has happened very quickly. So there are people who remember 10 years ago when things were different. 20 years ago, things were very different. 30 years ago, boy, were things different. People were growing their own food and stuff like that. My dad could remember the war, before he passed away. So there are 1 or 2 individuals around that go right way back. All of a sudden, those people are going to become really valuable experts.
Yeah, of course. But do you think
they're going to think that?
Do you think 1 billion people will die from starvation?
Well, worldwide, it's going to be pretty tough. Yeah, worldwide, it's going to be pretty tough. But I suppose that's the message of hope at the end of the book. So it does take us back to Crystal Skulls. The point I'm trying to make at the end of the book is we need to pull together. We don't need to be complacent. We can't afford to say, just because we have a particular reason that part of the human race is no longer relevant, or that individual is no longer relevant. If somebody's unique and they have unique skills and they die, that's an extinction event, because it's gone. That information's no longer in the human pool. So I would say that sort of person's going to become a lot more important. And that's the message in the book, really. We need to value what we've got appreciate what we've got, understand what we've got, and then really work to that. There's no point sticking a virtual reality headset on and going off playing, Dungeons and Dragons type games, 24 hours a day. Sooner or later, that is going to come to an end. And like you say, and I hate to say this, Alex, but you're going to be sat there on your bed in your bedroom with a load of devices that don't work, and you're going to be there like going, okay, I've got no bread for toast. I don't know how to milk a cow, so how can I have a cup of tea? And so I get the point, Doug. I get what you're saying about, we're going to have to go back. So in a sense, there's a whole generation now that's been educated that technology is everything, and it's clearly not. It's a balancing act,
Absolutely.
And I don't.
Do you see this as a possibility in our lifetimes?
Well, it was a possibility. It was a reality in my lifetime. I'm just about at that age where I'm old enough to,
They didn't have internet, Alex, when we were.
Yeah, but I mean, like an EMP type event wiping out all electronics.
We did fine back when we were kids with no internet, nothing. Everything was analog. They had a cash register. They went chink, and the thing was mechanical in the drawer.
Yeah, when I was at school, they actually invented the biro. When I was at school, so as a teenager, there were £5 each for one of these biros, that are now like nothing. You buy a whole box for like pennies, but that's the level that we were at back then. The nearest thing to a computer educationally in schools was a cassette player. You had one of these tape players where you push it in at the top, press play, and add a set of headphones on. So we just have to go back. We'd have to go back, and as I say, it's not that long ago. I know your generation, Alex, is just going to panic. You know what I mean? You're going to get up in the morning. There won't be a mobile phone. You're going to be like, oh, my life is at an end.
What do I do?
That's the end of my world. But me and Doug will survive. We'll get by.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
I actually personally don't feel I'd have any issue.
No.
I'm ready to, I'll be cleaning fish every day, but, I'm not going to starve.
There was a saying years ago that the only people that are going to survive, hence the joke about like the cockroaches and the tardigrades and turning the light off. The joke was that the only people that are going to survive at the end of the world are archaeologists. Because at the end of the day, we're the only ones that have studied societies in the past, and we've studied past technology, and we've done experimental archaeology. We can fire pots, we can milk a cow. We know how things grow, we know how things function. So all of a sudden, we're going to be fine. As soon as everybody stops shooting each other because the bullets have run out and nobody's making any more, we're going to be walking around with crossbows and longbows, and swords and shields and armor and stuff like that, because we know how these things work. We know where this is going to go. If it went really south and it really went bad, we over here, we just go and rebuild the hill forts. Build yourself a stockade, throw up a roundhouse, light a fire, and off you go. That's another thing. We know how to light fires. Funnily enough, by shining sunlight through a quartz crystal, but that's another story. We're back to crystal skulls again.
Everything comes back to these darn crystals.
Yeah, just.
Do you think we've gone too far though, relying on technology? I certainly do.
Well, there's a question there. Can you go too far with technology? I'm secretly a big fan of Elon Musk. Well, I'm not secretly anymore because everybody knows now, but I'm a fan of Elon Musk because I think he's got a lot of good things going on. There's a bit of nonsense.
He's got common sense, at least.
Yeah.
He's got some common sense.
He's got his fingers on some weird pies, but at the end of the day, he is getting hold of technology and doing things with it, which is the whole point, isn't it? At the end of the day, that's what technology is for. Computer games, in a sense, don't do it for me because it's almost like a wholesale misuse of technology, because you don't achieve anything. You're not going anywhere with it. Right. Somebody else is making money off your time and, all that. It doesn't really have a good logical outcome for me. But the technology is amazing. You know what I mean? We can see inside a human body now with a CAT scan. We can plot things in 3D. The cutting edge side of it is just phenomenal. So I wouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater is what I'm saying. I think technology has got a massive amount to offer, and I don't think it's evil per se. I don't think, we're not all going to end up going to hell in a motorboat when the cataclysm hits just because, we can't program a computer. It's the different people do different things and different outcomes will result from that. But I don't think technology is bad per se. Yes, it's invaded every corner of our lives and it annoys the hell out of me. You know what I mean? I nearly had a meltdown when you told me that this was going to go out on StreamYard, because I thought, what the hell's StreamYard? Yeah, I've not used that. I've used Skype and I've used Zoom and and all about that. But
something new, yeah.
So it's yeah.
So do you feel like we're losing touch with the analog way of life, and that's problematic?
Over here,
cows.
There's a whole generation of teenagers over here that have never actually gone out and sat under a tree when it's raining. That's like, that is really camping. Sad. Well, it's not even camping, you know what I mean? If you've got a big tree in your backyard, or there's one in the field opposite, and boom, all of a sudden it starts raining, the rain starts coming down. Go and find a nice, comfortable bit of root out there and go and sit under there and just put your head back against the tree and close your eyes and let the rain fall on your face. I'll tell you what, if you do that just once in summer, so you don't freeze to death because it gets cold over here, you only got to do that once and you'll start doing it again, and then you'll start doing it again, and then you'll do it again. And all of a sudden, you'll be spending a lot less time in front of your computer, because the tree will communicate with you, the electricity will communicate with you, the smell, the feeling, the sensation, the water that's falling on your face, the fact that you're grounded, you're joined into the earth, everything, the whole experience. It's a complete, surround sound experience. You're in it. It's 3D and it's real, and it is amazing, absolutely amazing. But there's a whole generation of kids that have never done that. It's crackers.
Lost to them.
So we're about out of time. Why don't you spend the last bit on where people can get a hold of you, and where do you want them to buy your books and all that?
Okay, I've enjoyed this so much, I don't want to go. I'll just throw that in now. Compliments to you guys. You've done an absolute cracking job. Okay, keep it dead simple. On the one hand, let's say you want product. You want to go and buy books and stuff like that. Amazon. Go to Amazon, type my name in. Any of the books, you'll find Celtic Warrington and Other Mysteries. There's 3 of those. Disappearing Ninth Legion, all about the legion that marched out of York, never to be seen again. That's Roman stuff. Revealing the Green Man, you'll find that. Here we are. Look at this. Wow, technology. There they all are. They're all on Amazon. Go and find them. If you look for the Robin Hood one, that's the bottom one with the sword on. Don't forget it's spelt ROBYNHOODE, because that has caused problems when people are searching for it. But as has just been proven, if you go on there, they're all on there. Boom, there they are. Go and buy those, especially Crystal Skulls and Human Heads. I'll just give you an exclusive. If you order the hardback copy, it has got to be the sexiest book I've ever seen. It comes in matte finish. It's gorgeous. It'd make a great Christmas present. So just order absolute loads of Crystal Skulls in hardback, because it's really nice. So they're all on there. That's the answer to number 1. You want to get hold of the product, go and find it on Amazon. You want to get hold of me, so you're trying to find out where I am. Internationally, you can do a search of Facebook. Have a look on Facebook. I'm the one holding the crystal ball, and the photograph's in blue, so you can't miss it. One of the other guys that says Mark Olly is actually one of my sons, so sooner or later you'll end up gravitating back to me. Link with me on Facebook, and as I say, if you want to communicate, do it through Messenger. Mainly because it's international, it's dead reliable, no problems whatsoever. If you want to book me or you want me to do anything like that, we can always take it to emails, from Messenger. But that's it. So it's Amazon for product, Facebook for me. Dead simple.
That's pretty simple. What didn't we cover tonight? Oh my God, we just talked about all sorts of
totally enjoyed it. I mean,
you could have been here another 2 hours.
Yeah. I'll do you another one. Yeah, get me back on another one. Why not just say archaeology? Start collecting questions on ancient history.
Well, we've got 1 minute. So where do you stand on the world's climate change? Because I always tell people, well, God, thank God there's climate change, because I'd be sitting under 400 feet of ice. So,
well, yes, I'm in exactly the same place as you. As a geologist, I would say we're coming out of the ice age, or ages. We're coming out of the last phases of the ice ages. And I would say that you're going to see climate change. Changes have occurred actually within the archaeological record very recently. Even in the last few hundred years, we've had changes. So I don't think it's the cause for panic that it's being made out to be. And I don't think we're as big a contributing factor to that as is being made out either. Chaos makes money, basically. So you've just got to be a bit skeptical, I think, of the way it's going. And specifically on different parts of the world, the changes are different anyway. So people are responding to it in different ways. which is what you'd expect.
Well, how long ago? I mean, I heard, I can't remember his name, another geologist who was talking about how it wasn't really that long ago. The ocean was 400 feet shallower.
Yes, the ocean is deeper now than it has been in the past.
Yes.
But, and it's a big but, a lot of the land masses have dropped. So you've got to allow for the fact.
So both has happened.
Yeah, the Earth's crust is constantly changing. It's constantly moving. The best example, I'll go back to one that's in the interview when I mentioned the Gulf of Mexico. You know, this socking great big meteorite smacks into the Gulf of Mexico. It pushes the Gulf of Mexico down, and all the rest of the land surrounding that comes up. And then you start to get continental drift. So all the continents basically are drifting outwards. They're slowly moving away from this gigantic impact. So you're definitely going to see changes. But once you start looking at that, you look at the geological movements and what have you, and factor that in, it's got absolutely bog all to do with the ice. You know, this last year, there's been more ice in Antarctica than they've ever had on, you know, in historical records. I know there's less in the North Pole, but there's more in the South Pole.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's
the
not.
The Earth seems to balance somehow. It just keeps balancing.
Well, it does. Exactly. Back to intelligent design. The planet itself looks after itself. It's back to the Gaia principle, the fact that the planet's alive and it's living and it looks after itself, you know. Just got to hope it doesn't get fed up with us, you know.
I remember George Carlin said it'll shake us off like fleas on a dog.
I remember that quote. Yeah. He's not wrong. He's not wrong.
Okay, with that quote, we're going to sign off, I guess. Thanks, Mark.
Great having
awesome. They were just a
absolute
blast.
Pleasure. Absolute
just a blast.
Pleasure.
We'll talk soon. Bye.
Please do.